along the lines of, they gave me the big booming voice this morning, Moses. I want to talk to you today along the lines of God uses ordinary people. And I was thinking about, this past week was the NFL draft, right? And y'all know who got taken number 2 in the NFL draft? Saquon Barkley from the Lehigh Valley, from Whitehall. Don't sleep on the Valley. Don't sleep on the Valley. And I thought about this. Yeah, he's gonna get a $33 million contract. His mama was smiling. In the NFL draft, what teams do is teams look for the best, most qualified talent. They have this thing called the combine, right? Where they invite all the best of the best of the best, right? And they measure how fast they run. They measure how many pumps of the weight that they can do, how high they can jump. They measure all the metrics. And then based upon all the natural scores, they rake them all up and they say, oh yeah, he's going to be this high, he's going to be that high, he's going to be worth this, he's going to be worth that, right? And then the ones that aren't good enough, they don't even get drafted. And so the ones who don't get drafted, they got to try to make a team by just kind of walking on as a free agent and hoping that they can kind of do something. And I think a lot of times for us as believers, we believe God is all that God says that he is. And we believe that God can do all that God says he can do. But we don't necessarily believe we're draft worthy. Wow. We don't believe we're draft worthy. We look at our measurables and we say, I don't measure up. Spiritually speaking, I don't run so fast. I don't jump so high. I'm not that strong. Because after all, if you really knew me, you'd know I'm not draft material for God. But the thing I love about the Bible is that the Bible is a spiritual book. But at the same time, God intentionally and purposely is so practical and realistic in his portrayal of his relationship and his engagement with man. And God, all through the scriptures, he uses ordinary people. They become quote-unquote superstars when we look back on what God did with them and through them. We go, oh yeah, Moses, that's a bad boy, Moses. But Moses was a bad boy in the beginning. We look at David and we say, oh, David was a bad boy. But David wasn't even drafted when Samuel came by to anoint one of Jesse's sons to be king. David wasn't even drafted. He was still out in the field. God uses ordinary people. And my desire, my sincere hope for you this morning is for you to recognize that God says, hey, I want to use you. You're draft worthy. You are first team material. You can do more than just sit on the bench. And I want to take a look at the story of Gideon. How many of us have heard the story of Gideon? Let me give you a little bit of background. Israel has come into the promised land. And this is in the book of Judges. And Israel has come into the promised land, and they did everything God told them not to do. God said, don't mess with them ites, the Midianites, the Canaanites, the Amalekites, all the ites. God said, leave the ites alone. What do? They intermarry, they start worshiping their gods, and then all of a sudden the consequence and the judgment of that disobedience comes upon Israel. And now here's God's people, Israel, in the promised land. 40 years of wandering to make it in. They make it in, and because of their disobedience, now, for 7 years, they have faced invasion from the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other ites. And every time that they would plant harvest, and it came time to reap the harvest, here come the ites and snatch up all of their harvest. And Israel was on the verge of starving. Look with me in Judges chapter 6, verse 6. Judges chapter 6, verse 6. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. Hard times, rough times, they're on the verge of starvation, and they cry out, God, help us, God save us, God send us another Moses, God send us a deliverer. Look at verse 11 of chapter 6. That's our backdrop. Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the oak tree of Oprah, not Winfrey, which belonged to Joash, the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, had been threshing wheat, watch this, at the bottom of a wine press to hide the grain from the Midianites. Here's Gideon. Remember, the Midianites, every time it's harvest time, they come and take everything. Now here's Gideon hiding out in the bottom of a wine press, in a hole, grinding out his little wheat. They ain't going to get my bread. I'm going to get some bread today. They ain't going to get mine. And this is the one that the angel of the Lord comes to in response to Israel's cry for help. You see, a lot of us, a lot of believers, we have this, I call it the superstar syndrome, right? We have the superstar syndrome. We want the superstar to pray for us. We listen to the superstar sermons, right? We have this thing in our mind that, are they draft worthy? And here's God, his people on the verge of starvation, they're crying for help, and God goes to the draft board, if you will. And he looks, he says, first round, no. Second round, third round, you know what? I'm going to take somebody that's not even on the board. I'm going to take somebody hiding in a wine pit in a hole because he's scared. First thing that we need to understand about us being draftable, us being usable by God is this. God knows all about you. God knows all about you. See, that's why for me, like years ago, I gave up the front. I gave up trying to impress people, trying to front for people, because I realized, wait, God knows everything. Because if I lie to you, I'm really only lying to myself. Right? So the first thing we need to understand, God knows all about you. And to know all about you, first thing is he understands and knows about our abilities. Look at this. Verse 12. The angel of the Lord appeared to the cat hiding in the wine pit because he's scared. And he said, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. This is God. God is saying to the cat hiding in the wine pit because he's scared, mighty hero. Watch Gideon's response. Mighty hero, the Lord is with you. Oh man, I feel a preach coming on. Listen. Verse 13, watch this. Watch Gideon. Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, watch this. Why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. Now watch this. So here's what he said. He's saying this to the angel of the Lord. Right? There's nothing in the scripture to indicate to us that the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon other than the angel of the Lord. And Gideon says, you talk that mighty hero stuff you want. Well, after all this stuff I read and heard about that God did, where he at now? Don't you see where we at now? See, that's like so many of us. We base our present faith and our ability to move with God and to respond with God on the circumstances around us. Because it doesn't look like we think it ought to look like. That's right. We think God ain't with it. We think God's not in it. Watch. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. You see, God knows all about our abilities. God knows Gideon was a coward. God knew that Gideon was afraid. But God said, Gideon, I want you to do something. What I want you to do, Gideon, is to what? Go. Go how? Go with the strength that you have. I'm certain that Gideon was amongst the Israelites that was crying out to God for help. And now God is saying to Gideon, I want you to be the answer to your own prayer. Gideon, I want you, regardless of what it looks like, feels like, regardless of what it seems, I know you're scared, but I want you to go with the strength you have. Don't wait till you get yourself right. Don't wait till you can try to fix yourself right. Don't wait till you're done doing this and you've prepared that and you've studied this and you've done that. No, Gideon, I need you to go with the strength that you have.
My God.
God knows all about our abilities. He came to Gideon knowing Gideon was scared, but yet he said, Gideon, I'm putting you at the top of my draft board. Look what Ephesians chapter 1:19 says, because what we're going to do in this talk today, we're going to look at the illustration in the Old Testament story, and then we're going to look for New Testament application through New Testament principle and precept, all right? So look what Ephesians 1:19 says. I pray that you will begin to understand the incredible greatness of his power for us who believe him. Look at these words. When I was studying, I said, no, look at these words. The incredible greatness of his power for us who believe. He told Gideon to go with the strength you had. What God is trying to encourage you today is go with the strength you have. And what's the strength that you have? You have his incredible greatness of power. You have more on the inside of you than you can imagine. You have more power and ability on the inside of you than you could ever think. And what is this great power that you have? Look at what it says. It says, this is the same mighty power. Verse 20. The same mighty power that raised Christ from the dead and seated him in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenlies. The ability that you have, the power that is working inside of you, the greatness of his mighty power in you is the same resurrection power that got Jesus up out there too. See, that's why I always say Easter is a holiday. The Christian life is the resurrection every day. Every day. Because that same power is waiting to open tombs and to raise the dead inside of you every day. See, God knows your abilities. All God said to Gideon was, go with what you got. Give me what you got. I'll work with the rest. Second thing we need to know, God not only knows about our abilities, God knows about our insecurities. Now, I'm going to tell y'all something. I've told you this before, but I'm probably one of the most insecure people in and of myself, by myself, you'll ever meet. God knows about our insecurities. Watch Gideon's response, verse 15. He says, "Then go what you got." Watch Gideon. "But Lord," Gideon replied, "how can I rescue Israel?" Watch this. "My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family." So here's Gideon. Gideon said, "Lord, you don't understand, Lord. I'm really not draft worthy. I'm behind Mr. Insignificant. Mr. Insignificant is the last guy every year taken in the draft. They call him Mr. Insignificant, and then they give him a parade down at Disneyland, right? He said, listen, I'm not even Mr. Insignificant. Listen, my family is raggedy, we weak, our tribe is raggedy and weak, and not only that, I'm the raggediest of the whole family. Why you want me? See, many of us, we look at our background, we look at our experiences, we look at what we have or don't have, we look at our weaknesses, we look at our failures, we look at our inconsistencies, we look at our low self-esteem, and we say, God, no, not me. No. We take ourselves off the draft board. Amen. Watch God's response. Verse 16. The Lord said to him, I will be with you. Oh, my goodness. I will be with you. Oh Lord, can we just pause for a moment? The God of heaven, the God that flung the universe with just his word. And scientists tell us that the universe is still expanding. That God says to Gideon then, and he says to you and I today, I'm with you. I'm with you. You feel alone sometimes because we don't recognize who's with us. God says, Gideon, I'm with you, Gideon. I know your insecurities, Gideon, but I'm with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. Gideon, I'm with you. I'm going to give you some abilities, Gideon, and you won't get this thing done. Why? Because I am with you. I know about your insecurities. I know about your less than stellar family heritage and background. I know about your weaknesses and your deficiencies. But it don't stop my plan. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. This is Paul writing to the first century church. He says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, watch this, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful, or wealthy when God called you. Verse 27. Instead, watch this, God deliberately chose the things the world considers foolish, in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose those who are powerless to shame those who are powerful. Why does God do this? Why does God goes off the draft board and he looks for the ones that no one would have ever picked and would have ever drafted? Watch verse 28. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all. And he used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. You feel insecure? You wrestle with your sense of identity, your sense of value at times? I do too. But that just puts us in perfect position for God to do what only God can do, because those are the people that God uses. God doesn't use the ones that think they're wise. God doesn't use the ones that think they're important. Those are not the ones God picks. Notice what we do in the church. That's what we look for, right? So. We look for the ones with degrees. In modern church, we're trained. You look for the educated folks, you look for the professional folks, because those are the ones that you can use to build your organizational infrastructure. And then the regular folk, you just kind of ignore them, and you just kind of keep them happy, but you don't really rely on them to build. That's totally antithetical to the principle of the kingdom. Remember what the religious leaders said about Jesus' disciples in the book of Acts. They said, who are these unlearned men? Who Who are these ignorant folk? They run around turning the world upside down. These uneducated, unqualified, ordinary folk. They turn the world upside down. Then they said this, we know what the problem is. We perceive they have been hanging out with that Jesus. God knows about our insecurities. But insecure people, weak things, the unwise things, the things that the world says are not important, those are the ones that God uses. That's why the Bible says, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought.
That's right.
If you think you're wise, you're in trouble. Man may use you, but that don't mean God will use you. I know some of that's just one true. Third thing. So God says to Gideon, I know about your abilities, but go with the strength you had. I got some power that I've resided in you. I know about your insecurities. Don't worry, I'm going to be with you because I don't really use the wise things and the powerful things and the strong things. I like using the things that are weak in their own eyes. I like using the things that are insecure in their own eyes. The third thing, God knows about our doubts. God knows about our doubts. Watch Gideon, verse 36, 37. Watch Gideon. Then Gideon said to God, if you are truly going to use me, what's that word? That if you are truly going to use me to rescue Israel as you promised, watch this. Prove it to me. Prove it to me in this way. I will put some wool on the threshing floor tonight. And this is the story where he says, okay, God, we'll put some wool on the threshing floor. And here's what I'm going to do. I want that wool fleece to be wet and everything else around it to be dry. And so God does it. God does exactly what Gideon says. And when Gideon goes to the fleece, he's able to wring out a whole bowl of water out of that fleece. It's wet and everything around it is dry. But that ain't enough for Gideon. Gideon said, the Lord, don't get mad at me. Don't get mad. But can we flip the script? Can we make the fleece dry and everything else around it wet? Because I got doubts. You know I'm not sure about my abilities. You know I got some insecurities. And you say you're going to use me to do this. I need to know. And God does it. Why? Why do you think God does that? See, the faith preachers, they would tell you that your doubts disqualify you. That's what the faith preachers would tell you. But when we look in the Old Testament, Abraham had doubts, and what did God do? Cut a covenant. Gideon had doubts twice. He said, well, look at here, Lord. Do it like this. All right, now do it like that. All right, you convinced me. All right. God didn't disqualify him because his doubts. God knows you got doubts. God knows you have doubts about yourself. God knows that you have doubts about what you could actually do. God knows you have doubts about, well, if I start, can I commit to finish? God knows all about your doubts. And we allow our sense of abilities and our insecurities and our doubts to stop us from getting in the game. But I'm here to encourage you. None of that is taking God by surprise. And he still wants to use you. Look at Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. Watch what it says. Why does God still wants to use you? Why would God still work with the man that doubted his word? If somebody doubts us, we're like, well, I'm cutting them off. I told them I was going to do it. They didn't believe it. I'm cutting them off. Ephesians 2:10, watch. For we are God's masterpiece. He created us anew in Christ Jesus so we can do the good things. Watch this. He planned for us long ago. You see, God doesn't he doesn't focus on our doubts. He focused on that stuff that he planned and purposed for you when he saved you, when he called you. The reason why you went through the headache, the reason why you went through the pain, the reason why you went through the difficulty, the reason why you got dogged and your friends talked about you and they left you, he left you, she left you. God has a purpose for all of that. And whatever doubts those circumstances may create, it doesn't nullify the thing God planned for us long ago. Watch this. 3:20. Why do our doubts not mess up God? Now unto him that is able to do what? Exceedingly. See, that Paul was a heck of a writer, man, because the way he used words, right? Exceedingly and abundantly above all that we ask or think. What is a doubt? A doubt is what you think. Right. Listen, God is able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all your doubts. Wow. Whatever you doubt, whenever you feel the prompting and the urging of God to move, to be deployed for use, whenever your doubts rise, God said, I can work above that. I can do above your doubts. You see, God has the ability to operate beyond our doubts because his plans aren't dependent on our abilities, our insecurities, or our doubts, but his power. It's not us. It's him. Fourth thing. Y'all with me? Fourth thing God knows about. He knows about our abilities, our insecurities, our doubts. Fourth thing, God knows about our boast. He knows about our boast. See, God allows us to face difficulties so that we will be unable to boast. Look at Judges 7:2. Watch this. I love this part. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many warriors with you. If I let all of you fight the Midianites, the Israelites will what? Boast to me that they saved themselves by their own strength. God said, you got too many folk. You got too many folk. They had about 30,000. God said, that's too many. Now, the Midianites had about 120,000. Wow. Imagine Gideon. I don't get ahead of myself. God says, too many of y'all. Because if I let all of y'all fight, y'all going to be, watch this. Watch what he says. They will boast to who? No, God said the Israelites will boast to me. That they saved them. Hey, God, I knew you was with us. God, I knew you had plans, but I got this. I took care of myself, no problem, no worry, God. You don't even have to get up off the throne. We got this. And guess what, God? I know you said not by power, nor by might, but by my spirit. But God, we did this by our own strength. So watch what God tells him in verse 3. Because God says you got too many people. He says, therefore tell the people, whoever is timid or afraid, they may leave and go home. Right? So here's Joshua. Here's Gideon. He goes and says, God says, whoever now is afraid, you can go home. And 22,000 cats pack up their stuff and say, see, peace. Peace. Leaving them only 10,000 men. You got 120-something thousand cats you about to go up with, and 22,000, because God knows about our boast. Watch this. He's left with 10. But the Lord told Gideon, you still got too many. You still got too many. Watch this. Bring them down to the spring, and I will test them to determine who will go with you and who will not. So God says, bring them down to the spring. And then God says to him, okay, Gideon, here's what you're going to do. All of those men who stoop down and scoop up the water in their hands and drink the water out of their hands, you set them aside. But all of them that run down and just plunge their face into the stream and start slipping right out of the stream on their knees, he said, no, you put them over to one side. Now watch this. Here's what ended up happening. Only 300 drank with their hands. The rest slurped the water. And so Gideon sent them home. The biblical record said there's 135,000 Midianites. And now God is asking Gideon to face them with only 300. Less than 1% of the original size of his army that was already outmatched. Why does God do this? Because again, he said it's not by power nor by might, but it's by my spirit. He wants to make sure that no one can boast in God's sight. No one can say, God, look what I did. God, look what I accomplished. You ought to be glad, God, I'm on your team. You did the right thing in drafting me. Look, God, you could have got this done without me. Don't you see all my credentials? Don't you see all the things that I've accomplished? Don't you see my titles, God? So God gets them down to just 300 people. Because he didn't want Gideon to be able to boast. He wanted Gideon to fully understand that the battle is the Lord's. And not only is the battle the Lord's, but the victory. See, many of us, we keep trying to do it.
You're right.
We keep trying to do it. And I want to tell you, man, the hardest thing to do is to let go and let God. The hardest thing to do when it don't look like what you think it would look like, when it don't turn out in the short term how you think it would turn out, to say, God, I'm going to take my hands off it and I'm going to let you do it. God, I'm going to watch 22,000 walk away. God, I'm going to watch another 10,000 walk away. And God, I'm going to rejoice in 300 going up against 120. Why? Because God, I recognize that you use ordinary people. And these weren't 300, special forces. This was 300 cats. Watch what 1 Corinthians 1:28 and 29 says. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. And here's the emphasis. Why? So that no one can ever boast in the presence of the Lord. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7, because God understands our boast. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 7. We know this is the end of the portion where one man plants, another man waters, but God gives the increase. Right? Watch this. The one who does the planting or watering, they aren't important. But God is important because he is the one who makes the seed grow. 2 Corinthians 4:7. But this precious treasure, this light and power that now shines within us, is held in perishable containers, that is, in our weak bodies. Why? So everyone can see that our glorious power is from who? God, and not our own. God uses ordinary people. God uses people in recognition of our abilities, that we really don't have strength in and of ourselves. He recognizes our insecurities, that we see ourselves as weak and insufficient. He recognizes there are times when we doubt that he will do what he says he will do. And he recognizes that we have a tendency to want to do it on our own so that we can boast, not just before men, but boast in our hearts before God. And because of that, God will allow the circumstance God will allow the circumstance in the situation to seem difficult and insurmountable, so that when you do achieve victory, there will be no doubt in anybody else's mind who it was that did it.
Thank you, Lord.
Have you ever has he ever done something for you like that?
Yes.
When it didn't look like no how, no way? Boy, look.
Say it. Yes, thank you, Lord.
So when we step out and we run into challenges, we shouldn't let those challenges cause us to shrink back and to go back and sit on the bench. But we should look at those challenges through the lens. God, maybe you're trying to deal with the potential of a boast in me. Can I tell you something? Can I be real? Can I be honest, raw real? This is honest, raw real, right? When I finally said yes to the Lord and started this church, here's what I thought. It's real talk. It's real talk, right? I said, well, once folks in the valley know that Dave Jones back, man, in 3 years, we're going to be 600-700. Because I got it like that, Lord. You know how we roll, Lord. God knows how to deal with your boast. He will not allow any flesh to glory in his sight. And he will allow difficult circumstances to come so that in the end, not only others, but you will know who did it. Because we rely so much on what we think our abilities are. And we tag God's name onto it, but we really think at the end it's just us. God knows all about our abilities, our insecurities, our doubts, our boast. And most importantly, God knows about our fears. God knows about our fears. So Gideon has watched all of these cats leave the camp. Gideon was shaky from the get-go. He was shaky with 32,000. How shaky you think he is now with 300? Now watch. So they all break camp, they leave camp. Now here's Gideon at night. Because you know how the enemy talking to you at night. You be laid in the dark and the enemy like, yeah, you know you ain't going to work that. I ain't going to work. They ain't going to give you that job. I ain't going to work. That thing ain't never going to grow. Don't be. Don't do it. Watch this. During the night, the Lord said, get up. Go down into the midnight camp. For I have given you victory over them. But watch this. But if you're afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant, Purah. So here God knows. He knows what's going through. He says, get up, man. I've given you victory, man. Get up. Now, if you're scared, going down to the camp, and watch this. Verse 11, he says, listen to what the Midianites are saying, and you will be greatly encouraged. Then you will be eager to attack. So Gideon took Purah and went down to the outpost of the enemy camp. So here he is, he's laying in the tent at night, thinking to himself, all these folks have gone, all I got is 300 cats. What in the world are we going to do? God comes to him and God speaks a word to his fear. And you know what fear is, right? Fear is false evidence appearing real. Fear is false evidence appearing real. Fear is the greatest weapon of the enemy. It cripples us and causes us not to take steps of faith. The Bible says, be aware because your enemy, the devil, prowls about like a what? Roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. I had a chance to take a trip to Africa. And I found out what that whole roaring lion thing was all about. Because young lions that got game, they don't roar. They creep. They creep up on their prey. The old lions that sit around the pride talking about what they used to do, selling wolf tickets. The old lions, they roar. Because the old lions ain't got it like they used to. They can't run the cheetah down, right? So the old lions, they roar in the hopes that the fear from the roar will cause their prey to be paralyzed and not move.
Wow.
Your enemy, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion, trying to get you to embrace false evidence appearing as real. How many times have you not stepped out in obedience because of false evidence appearing as real? How many times have you not responded and allowed God to use you because you allowed the enemy to cripple you, because you allowed those whispers from the enemy in the darkness of night to permeate your heart and your mind? God comes to Gideon and says, get on up and go on down to the camp. And what? And he said, you're going to hear something. You're going to hear something. Why? Because faith comes by what? Hearing. Oh, well, what you hearing? What you hearing? See, when you get around the naysayers, the people that are always talking about what ain't going to happen, and this ain't going to happen, and why you doing that, and why you with them, and why you there, and why you all that. That's what causes you to not allow yourself to be used. That's what causes you to be paralyzed, because the enemy has used them to cripple you with false evidence appearing real. He said, going down, you're going to hear something. And what you hear is going to deal with your fear. Luke 1:74 tells us this. It says, we have been rescued from our enemies so that we can serve God. How? Without fear. Not being controlled by false evidence appearing as real. 2 Timothy 1:7, y'all know this. God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity. Timid. Passive, always stepping back rather than pushing forward. He ain't giving us that. But what he's given us is a spirit of power, love, and self-discipline. God knows all about your fears. And he sent me this morning to give you something to hear that would encourage you to position yourself, to get off the bench, to get in the game, and to allow God to use you. See, here's I close with this. Here's the operating principle for us. As we obey God, it increases our faith. As we obey God, it increases our faith. Gideon starts off in a wine pit, hiding, trying to grind out some wheat for bread, hoping nobody comes and steals a meal. And God says, the first thing God says to Gideon is, go with the strength you have. Gideon said, Lord, I don't see all this power that I heard talked about with you. You brought us out of Egypt, power under the blood, parting the Red Seas and plagues and all that. Where you at? I don't see none of that. God says, go with the strength you have. Gideon took that first step of obedience. He took that first step of obedience. And every step down the way, Gideon was responding with obedience. And every step you take in obedience, despite your abilities, despite your insecurities, despite your doubts, despite your fears, despite your boast, every step you take of obedience produces more faith to take the next step. A lot of times we say, I don't have the faith for that. And God is saying, well, go with the strength you have. Take one step of faith. When God said, start this church, I said, no, Lord, I don't want to do church anymore. I'm done. I tell you what, Lord, I'll start a Bible study. That's enough faith I got. I got enough faith for a Bible study. God said, all right, start the Bible study. See, God's not expecting you to go from the wine pit to ready to face your enemies with only 300 men overnight. There are progressive steps. Watch this. And so Gideon obeyed God in the midst of his fear, and he went down to the camp. Watch. The armies of Midian and Amalek and the people of the east had settled in the valley like a swarm of locusts. Their camels were like grains of sand on the seashore, and there were too many to count. So they're down in the valley, and they're just blanketing the valley like sands on the seashore. Far too many to count. So Gideon and his servant, they creeped down to the camp, and just as they creeped up, they heard a soldier talking about his dream. Watch this. The previous verse says, and just as they got there, they heard a soldier talking about the dream. And this is what the man said. The man said, I had this dream, and in my dream, a loaf of barley bread came tumbling down into the Midianite camp. It hit a tent, turned it over, and knocked it flat. His friend said, oh, your dream can only mean one thing. God has given Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite, victory over all the enemies united with Midian. Watch this. When Gideon heard the dream, see, he took that step of faith. He was afraid. But he took that step of faith, and God orchestrated that just as they crept up around the corner, boom, that conversation happened just as they crept up around the corner. And when Gideon heard, because faith comes by hearing, when Gideon heard the dream and its interpretation, he thanked God. Then he returned to the Israelites' camp and shouted the same thing God said to him. What did God say to him? Get up. He goes back into the camp. What does he say? Get up, for the Lord has given us victory over the Midianites. God uses ordinary people. And the story continues, and the story is that they go out and they wipe out the Midianites. 135,000, there's only 15,000 that survive. And Gideon is in pursuit of that 15,000 with his 300. And Gideon, the guy that was ordinary, the guy that was hiding in the pit, the guy that had concerns about his abilities, his insecurities, had doubts, that was liable to boast, the guy that was just laying in the bed the night before, crippled with fear, that guy, that ordinary guy, before he became Gideon the great general, he was just Gideon. Oh, from that family. Yeah, he's the littlest in that family, from the littlest tribe. Oh yeah, hey man, yeah. You see, the scriptures are full of stories where people are called by God to do something special for them. These people, they're really, guys, they're just like you and me. They're just common, ordinary people. Because God doesn't use superheroes. God uses ordinary people who are obedient. God uses ordinary people who are obedient. Moses was obedient. He had failed. He was living on the backside of the desert in Midian tending sheep. And God said, go, tell Pharaoh, set my people go. And Moses was obedient. David was obedient to go and face Goliath. And he became the David that we know today. Nehemiah was obedient. Nehemiah was a butler. He was a butler, serving a cup to the king. That was his job. What cup we going to use today? Yeah, I think this is the right cup right here. That was his job, right? To be the cupbearer, right? And if there's any poison in the cup, guess who was getting it? Nehemiah, not the king. So Nehemiah, in man's eyes, he was expendable. But he said yes to God. And he went back and he rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. Mary was a teenage girl from a poor family in a poor, obscure village. But she said, yes, she said, be it unto me according to thy word. She said, yes. What prevents you from being used by God? We already established God uses ordinary people with insecurities and doubts and fears and boast and all kinds of human deficiencies. What prevents you from being used is your obedience. To simply say, yes. And he will do exceedingly and abundantly above all that you ask or think. I'll leave you with this. God is more interested in your obedience, and he's more interested in your yes than anything else. Because just to attend church and just kind of do church and then not give God obedience outside of your attendance, he's unhappy with that. Watch what he says. What is more pleasing to the Lord? Your burnt offerings and sacrifices, or your obedience to his voice? Listen, obedience is better than sacrifice. Watch. And submission is better than offering the fat of rams. God does use ordinary people. But the ordinary people must first take steps of faith that flow out of obedience and submission.